Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So today's topic is bringing structure to Microsoft 365, smarter email and records management. By the way, my name is Noelle from Gravity Union, and this webinar is brought to you by Gravity Union in collaboration with Colligo. So now I'll pass it on to our presenters. Mike and Tim, it's all yours.
Thank you. I recognize a bunch of names on the list of people, so it's nice to see a bunch of you. Yeah, Mike Schweitzer, President and CEO of Gravity Union. I've sort of been in the SharePoint and records management space for 15 years. My beard didn't used to be so gray back in the day when I started. Yeah, worked with my my friend Tim.
Yeah, great to be here. So I'm Tim Brady, the CEO of Colligo, and spent many years in the enterprise content management space and email management space, and work with Arma and AIM and Clock and echo Mike's comments. Great to see a bunch of familiar names in
Tim, are you wearing the exact same outfit in your picture as you are right now in live person? Excellent.
Pretty close. Pretty close.
Okay. Just a little bit about us. We are a Microsoft SharePoint implementation partner, Microsoft 365, and we work with mostly state government agencies, as well as some public sector implementation of enterprise implementations of Microsoft to kind of done right, where we really take the time to do it properly. We've got some fun stats here that we'll quiz you on at the end of the webinar. A bunch of our partners that we work with in sort of the migration and compliance space: Microsoft Preservica for archival, Collabora for records management, Colligo for managing emails. Fires Keepers is a cool tool for using AI to automatically update your file plan and SureGate for migrations. Tim, you want to talk a little bit about Colligo?
Awesome. Yeah. Next slide, please. Great. So at Colligo, we help organizations get the most out of one of the biggest sources of information into the enterprise, but also one that's fraught with risk and can be super valuable if handled correctly. But in a lot of organizations, it's not handled correctly, and that's email. So Colligo works inside Microsoft 365 to move important emails, attachments, all from Outlook into SharePoint, where they can be properly classified, governed, and made accessible. And we'll spend a lot more time on this later. The result is commonly better compliance, better collaboration, and better information management, and now better use of Copilot and some of the AI solutions out there. We've been in the space since 2000. We've worked with over 5,000 organizations in 55 countries throughout our history. And these organizations have all relied on Colligo to make email management easier, more compliant, and far more useful. And we'll show you the why and the how and what this looks like in practice as we go on throughout the webinar today.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so we'll go through today. We'll look at the challenges that lots of organizations are facing, perhaps in a bit of a post-COVID Microsoft 365 implementation hangover, how most organizations from a big picture are addressing those challenges. And then one sort of key component of addressing those challenges, of course, is helping people get important records and correspondence and attachments from their mailbox into SharePoint. So we'll do a live demo and we'll go into some Q&A. So lots of challenges, but certainly one challenge, and maybe I'll go off a little bit of a tangent here and go on one of my current rants around implementations of Microsoft 365, which is that lots of IT departments and people who have been part of IT projects have learned a lesson in those projects, in that the more detail that we add to our solutions, not necessarily SharePoint, but just in general, you're doing a custom software development project, and the more database tables, the more drop-down lists, the more input boxes that we have, the more complexity we have with that solution, the more pain we encounter after go live. The more bugs we get, the more issues, more problems that we have, so on and so forth. And so we've seen many organizations take that lesson learned into Microsoft 365, which isn't necessarily relevant anymore. SharePoint and Microsoft 365 are by and large mostly just configuration now. And it's when we have a lack of design and a lack of detail that we run into problems. And so many organizations have not really taken the time to design SharePoint, to do amazing, beautiful SharePoint sites that are scalable and securable and so on and so forth. And we end up seeing an overabundance of sites, an overabundance of content, duplicates, so on and so forth. And that sort of sets the stage for a lot of the challenges that we're seeing across enterprise organizations. So first, the thing being is that we sort of have these environments, and they have tons and tons of content now. We're seeing mailboxes hit their limits depending on your license that you have, or depending on the limit that's been placed by your organization. People have a ton of content. We're also seeing people bump up against the thresholds within SharePoint. So you have a certain limit of storage space that you get for free, and not for free, but with your license, and you're bumping into those limits, and people are starting to realize that that's not really a sustainable long-term approach. We need to like put a life cycle on this content and secure it. So one huge issue we're seeing. We're also seeing increased regulatory requirements. So whether it's privacy or GDPR or records management, we're seeing lots and lots of increased regulatory requirements being thrust upon us by regulatory authorities or governments and so on and so forth. And a lot of organizations are really starting to take this seriously and start to add those dimensions of compliance to their Microsoft 365 implementation. Oh, wrong order. We have a desire to derive value from organizational content through artificial intelligence. We've actually seen a huge uptick in the past 6 months with organizations that are finally wanting to jump in with both feet into this AI pool and get wet and play with it. And so one thing to consider, and a key thing, is that, you know, when we talk about products like Copilot, when you're asking it questions and working with the large language model and dealing with the artificial intelligence, you want it to be contextually aware about your organization, and it should be aware about your content and your projects or your departments and the people within your organization. But you don't want Copilot to train whichever LLM it's using behind the scenes with your organizational data. And this is also on a personal note. If you're using ChatGPT or using Anthropic's Claude, and you have the free version, chances are it's using any information that you're giving the chat window, whether it be documents. It's going to go train the model. It's part of the value that you get, that they get for giving you the service for free. Given that AI is this sort of really interesting technology that we don't really understand as humans, we don't really design it, we more evolve it. And so once your content is in the model, it's probably not coming back out, or it's very difficult to. So so the way that Copilot works is it's going to look at the question that you're asking it, and it's basically going to go off and do a search and look in your mailbox and look in SharePoint and try and find the content that it wants to augment that model with. Notably, if you have important decisions, important information, contracts, whatever that, in other people's mailboxes that you don't have access to in the wild, that content's not going to get fed into the model. So it's kind of critical and important to get that content into a location such that Copilot can put it in the reg and send it back to the model to train things. We also are seeing an increased threat from AI-based attacks. So we're seeing these really, really sophisticated attacks coming from AI-based solutions that are quite scary. And so big picture, the more secured, the more structured, the more dialed in your Microsoft 365 environment is, the better you are being able to tackle that, as well as if you can get a handle on your content and put lifecycle around it and reduce the surface area for attack and get rid of all the content that you don't need, it'll have less content to perhaps deal with. And then, yeah, big picture, we have most organizations that engage with us, by now they sort of have a messy implementation of Microsoft 365, and they're hitting, frustration with end users. They're having trouble leveraging artificial intelligence because the structure and organization isn't quite trusted. They're not quite sure if it's secured properly. It's hard to layer on workflows, do integrations, they're uncompliant, so on and so forth. So lots of big challenges that our clients are seeing right now in their Microsoft 365 enterprise implementations. Anything to add, Tim?
Yeah, what comes to mind here is, we went through this with SharePoint on-prem in the prior generation, and everybody's SharePoint's got, completely messy and unorganized and duplicates and all these problems. And, with the race to move to cloud solutions really started 2020 and has continued since. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of those same challenges today, just with a different look and feel to them, but same challenges, and then now layering AI on top of all this, right? And that data being more important than it's ever been. I think it's exacerbating those forces there and makes it even more important to get this in order. So
yeah, and to pile on top of that a little bit, like with SharePoint on premises, there was a throttling that occurred because you had so many site collections per content database, and you had to go out and buy new hard drives for your physical server, so on and so forth. And so there was a little bit of a limitation, harder limitations. And so with the cloud, it scales automatically as fast as you want. And so I think we're probably seeing a faster increase in sort of overall content saving and storage and so on and so forth. So big picture, how are organizations addressing this? So just trying to distill this into a meaningful list. Number one is to understand the mess. So what we typically see organizations do is you go figure out who are those site owners for the SharePoint sites, run reports and gain insights into that content. So we actually have a cool script that I created that will walk through your SharePoint sites, and it'll look at the name of the site, it'll look at the owner of the site, it'll look at the name of the document libraries and perhaps the names of the documents. I'm not diving in to look at the individual documents because that would be probably too expensive with artificial intelligence, but trying to get a sense for what is the nature of the site. Is it currently being used? What's the volume of content, so on and so forth? And that kind of feeds into reducing the size of it. So before we do any kind of real work around classification and records management and so on and so forth, we don't want to layer on a bunch of records management to a big, messy, unwieldy, out of control SharePoint site. We want to basically reduce that footprint and get rid of the rot. So typically we'll see organizations really try and reduce the size of their implementation. So let's get rid of all those empty SharePoint sites that were provisioned and barely used, or that haven't been used for 3 or 4 years and were super low value content. If you're unaware, and if you're an organization that is hitting your limits of SharePoint storage, interestingly, in I think it was 2013, SharePoint on premises added some sophistication when they were storing a copy of a version of a document. It was only going to store the delta. So if I went in and added one word, the new copy of that Word document only took up an extra couple of bytes of size in that database. So it was trying to do this intelligent storage optimization in the on-prem world. In the cloud, they charge you for every copy of that version, regardless of the changes that were made. And so the volume or your usage of that content is certainly increasing at perhaps a faster rate. And then, of course, if we're using Purview and we're storing copies of that content in our preservation hold library, we're seeing probably an increased utilization of storage within SharePoint. They have some cool features now that allow you to do intelligent versioning. So instead of simply storing 500 versions with the last one dropping off every time you create a new one, you can do intelligent versioning that will store daily, weekly, monthly, and the further out you go in that time frame, it'll start to drop off more and more versions. And we've seen organizations reduce their total storage by like 20, 30, 40% and just turning on that versioning capabilities. But it's nice because when you start to layer on things like Purview and records management, the more that we can reduce the footprint of our data in Microsoft 365, the more quickly those solutions will work and the more easily they'll run. And we have run into problems where if we have a super massive large mailbox, we weren't able to get some of the Purview features to work properly. So going through some versioning, certainly if you have some SharePoint sites that maybe you don't want to get rid of, maybe they're not rot, but maybe they're not super high value and you're not sure, you can archive them and put them back into the M365 archive area, which is going to technically will have cheaper storage than your regular SharePoint storage. Then going through and really governing the proper usage of Microsoft 365 workloads. So making sure that people are using OneDrive for its intended purpose, which is not corporate records. It's for your secret Santa party lists, your embarrassing Halloween photos, other things. It really shouldn't be storing records and contracts in our OneDrive. And then typically we're adding some data retention. So there's some not records management retention, but big bucket retention, like, hey, everything in OneDrive, because it shouldn't be of value, we're going to automatically delete after 2 years or 4 years or whatever you decide as your steering code decides to manage that stuff, as well as Outlook or Exchange. So we're going to automatically cap you at a certain size of mailbox. We're also going to automatically get rid of emails after 3 or 4 years because it's just taking up too much space. And we want to make sure that we're a bit of a carrot and stick of motivating people to get those emails into SharePoint, the emails and attachments into SharePoint. And so hence we'll need the tool, which we're getting a demo from Tim in a second there. Once we've gotten rid of a bunch of content, we've gotten rid of the rot, we've archived a bunch of sites, we deleted a bunch of empty sites, we got some retention happening on some areas. We then want to go and typically redesign, to the degree that is necessary, our SharePoint environment. So we typically see three main design patterns. We'll typically see some templates. Typically for more temporal SharePoint solutions, projects, committees, temporary team sites, your Christmas party planning group, where you don't want to stop and do a bunch of design for that, but if you want to go and request in your project site, have it provisioned immediately, and probably have some standard records management stuff applied to that through a case file. Self-service is an increasing design pattern that we're seeing, which is many large organizations have these huge sites, a bunch of existing sites, and they don't necessarily have the budget or the time or the capacity to go and completely redesign every site. But maybe what we can do is we can create sort of shopping cart style, where we allow users to go and request, hey, I need an area to manage my official policies or some procedures, or we need a contracts area. So those really important records or documents have some pre-baked enterprise solutions that we can add to what otherwise would be sort of a basic SharePoint site, and sort of find a bit of a balance there. And then we'll go into those highly governed and those detailed design sites where we're talking about the content that will probably live for a really long time, employee files, really important contracts, so on and so forth, and you'll roll up your sleeves and give it the Marie Kondo SharePoint design. Once we've got more structure applied to everything, then we'll go in and we'll layer on that compliance, records management, sensitivity, loss prevention, communication compliance, all the cool things in Purview, or with some of our partners like Collabware, or so on and so forth. So that's just sort of the big step. Each of these, depending on the size of the organization, like one of our clients, roughly 20,000 people, this is probably a 2-year process to go through all this, and in one fell swoop. It's not going to happen overnight. You got to eat the elephant one bite at a time. Over to Tim for the talk about this solution then. So certainly one key thing is, as we're going through this process, one key thing, and while we can apply records management to Purview to our mailbox, to just typically, again, we want to move a lot of the really important emails, correspondence, and attachments into SharePoint so that other people have access to it, so that Copilot can have access to it and get value out of it. And really, your mailbox is not the place where we store important records, because it's not very secure. It's not as secure as the SharePoint, and it's not just in terms of accidentally deleting stuff or having it fall off. Over to you, Tim.
Yeah, great. We like to say, Outlook is not a repository, right? Or Outlook is not a DMS, document management system. And it's really, for a lot of the reasons we'll get into in a sec, but to help with the challenges you've outlined here. Next slide. So, with Colligo, we try and make it ultra simple for users to be compliant and do all these things, right? And so the workflow for filing an email with Colligo, there's really 2 main workflows, but it's find your destination, click upload, and that's how you publish an email to SharePoint. Colligo takes care of a lot of the things Mike talked about in the background, the metadata, the retention, deeming this email a record, right? All those things you're going to care about as an organization, and we can handle a lot of that muck or that workload in the background for you and make it easy. And so, we do also have a second version that's an autofile for autofiling these emails, and we'll get into that more on the next slide. But what we look at is this is really important. It's important to keep people in the context where they're already working and spending their day, so you don't have to add another app, right? And you don't have to change their workflow. That's how we drive these really high adoption rates and make sure people are actually filing these emails. Because ultimately you need the workers, users to actually do this. Otherwise, you're not getting the benefits of it. And so what we see is make it super easy, explain the benefits and why this is important, how it can save them time, and Colligo can handle all the heavy lifting on helping you file these emails from Outlook into SharePoint. The concept is really not to change how people work, but to bring it into the apps they're already doing, reduce that friction, and then in the background drive better compliance and collaboration and security and reduce storage load and all that for the organization. Next slide. And so from an automation standpoint, this has really been quite a game changer, right? Colligo, many of you may know Colligo is, find your destination, up and hit upload, right? Super simple. But in a lot of use cases, you may actually want these emails to end up in SharePoint automatically, right? And this is, we've seen a lot of organizations take advantage of this. It works extremely well if you've been using folders in your Outlook at the end user level and you just want those folders to automatically sync up to SharePoint. And again, it's all about it's another way to file. It helps reduce that friction even more, make it even easier for folks to save emails if these are recurring and ongoing projects or case matters, things like that. And so we still do all the heavy lifting, the metadata and retention in the background, but we're really just trying to reduce the manual steps for filing these emails while still providing all those benefits for you as a user and for you as an organization. Just as an example, metadata, right? Every organization right now wants metadata because it's the context. It's so important in the age of AI and Copilot to provide that context. And it's also good for like workflows and analytics and all those things. But really, you want Colligo to automate that. No one wants to sit there typing in metadata tags. That's why a lot of the solutions in the past that prompted for metadata and things like that were not well adopted, right? So we want to automate that, take as much as we can out of the user's hands, and do that. Another example, and it's actually a form of metadata, would be like a retention label, right? And so if your SharePoint and Colligo are working together and everything's flowing properly, we can automatically apply those retention labels to an email or to an attachment as it's filed to SharePoint and just totally take that out of the user's hands. Of course, we can offer the ability for users to apply those retention labels at the point of ingress as well, but we can take it fully out of the user's hands as well. So it really comes down to that's an organizational decision on how you'd like to handle that. But this is where the automation can really kick in to augment the user's abilities and what they want to be doing and free up a lot of their time so they can spend their time on higher value work instead of filing emails and thinking about metadata tags and retention and things like that. And so in a lot of cases, users have to file these emails. They have to get it out of Outlook and into SharePoint to meet regulatory requirements, right? Mike mentioned that we're in an ever increasing regulatory environment and legal environment. And so you have to file these emails. They're evidence, they're business records, they're tribal knowledge, right? So we just have to make that as easy as possible so that people actually do it. And I think you'll see this in the demo later on. Next slide. So in terms of supporting compliance, really, we think of this as you're setting yourselves up for both current and future success, right? And so if you can apply these retention labels and policies more effectively and reduce the risk of something being deleted too soon or being kept too long, right? Both of those are equally important. We can really make that automatic and we can really support the organizational goals while making it easier for the end users. And we look at it as you're also avoiding the security risk in the same process, right? If you're reducing what's the surface area or what's left in mailboxes, left in people's Outlook, and putting those important emails into SharePoint and removing them from Outlook over time, we think that can be really helpful. An example of this, and I think Mike mentioned earlier, the storage on the Microsoft 365 keeps filling up. Well, we at Colligo here, a lot of folks come to us and say our Outlook is full, and people are running into performance issues where Outlook effectively becomes inoperable because they filled up their Outlook with all these emails thinking that it was basically unlimited, right? And if they were on Outlook in the early days, like 2016, 2017, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of data that's built up over time. We had a large energy company come to us and their legal team basically could not work because they had all these emails that they had stored in Outlook and needed a way to pump those over to SharePoint. So we were able to help them, move them rather than copy over from Outlook into SharePoint and keep the records. And they had tons of Outlook folders related to M&A deals and IP and things like that. And we were able to bring all of that over to SharePoint for them and provide a better way forward. Helps the organization from a compliance and security and performance and metadata perspective, but also the end users. They can actually do their job on a daily basis. And again, not have to worry about this and free up a lot of time to do their actual legal work or other work, depending on which group you're in, instead of worrying about filing emails and the administrative tasks around that. So the bottom line, save end users time, but also make sure you're accomplishing the governance, compliance, and now AI governance goals of the organization and aligning with proper record keeping and compliance and regulatory requirements on that side as well. Michael, see if you have anything else to add on that front.
Mike, I think you're on mute.
How embarrassing. We all probably said that at least one time today. You're on mute. Yeah, like I think big picture, the more organized you are, this is what we sort of tell all our projects. The more organized you are with your implementation, the more value you derive from the platform. And the more organized you are, the less clutter, the less volume, so on and so forth that you'll see over time. And there's everything follows on from that. So whether you're trying to layer on records management, whether you're trying to perform an ATIP investigation or FY request, the less content you have to deal with, the more organized or metadata we have, the easier it is to perform that function. If you want to do integrations, it's easier. If you want to do sensitivity, data loss prevention, if you want to do anything, artificial intelligence, it all flows from having a great design with your SharePoint site and being able to limit and get rid of the garbage of content that you don't need to make all those things work better. Search. I mean, at the end of the day, people don't realize this, but when Copilot is talking with your environment, it executes a search in SharePoint to look for the content. And so if you only have current, relevant, recent content in your environment that's rich in metadata, it's going to do a better job finding that content that's relevant for your AI solutions that you're building out.
Yeah, excellent. I think for years it seemed like, metadata was something most organizations wanted to do, but they needed that real catalyst to make it top of the agenda item. And I think that's where Copilot and AI has been really good in emphasizing the importance of that, right? And people see it when they search with that metadata and versus not, and the results that you produce, right? And so yeah, it comes back to what you said, the setting the foundation, right? Whether that's metadata or file structure or policies, it's super important to get value out of these systems. So,
and the more detail you add, the less support your implementation requires, which is a little bit counterintuitive. I think a lot of IT departments are used to the more detail we add to our solution. I know I kind of went around earlier, but the more detail that we add to our solution, the more headache. The actually opposite is true. The more detail and design that we add to our implementation, the less support and maintenance that the system needs going forward. And you can spend more time doing cool stuff like workflows or integrations or artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. I think we will pass it over to Roland for a demo.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, well, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Michael, for all that information. So my challenge here is to show you a solution using all the different components we talked about, using email, using AI, using Colligo, end-to-end solution that's very practical. And you'll be able to, you'll probably raise other kinds of solutions that you may want to consider. So the solution I'm going to demonstrate is, we'll call it a invoice organizer. All right. So just, I don't know if it was mentioned, but 4 or 5 records come in through email into an organization. And so managing those incoming emails and records properly is super important. All right. And so in this case here, I'm using a shared mailbox here called invoices. And I have a number of invoices coming in. So this is perhaps an address I've shared with my vendors. And in each of these emails, we have email. There might be some information in email, it might not be, but the prime thing here is the invoice, which could be, in this case, I have Word files, but they could be PDFs and so on. All right, so this is the starting point. And inside my inbox here, I do have a subfolder called vetted invoices, because of course, you're not going to necessarily rely on just moving stuff from your inbox into SharePoint. Maybe you need to do some vetting, make sure you get rid of the spam, make sure you get rid of the misdirected emails. And so just basically dragging it into the vetted invoices folder here is then where Colligo comes into play. And we can pick it up from here and move it over into SharePoint. And the way we're doing that is we're using a tool called Colligo Autofile. And I'll just show you the highlights of it. You basically start up Colligo, and we have a little module in here called Autofile. And it's just a simple wizard that you walk through. You load your folders, you pick the folder that you want to work with. All right, I'm just grab a folder here randomly. And then you pick on the other end, after you've selected that folder, you pick a destination. So in this case here, I would like to go to my invoices library, click on that, and then there's you set up some schedules and so on. But we'll skip over that. So just in summary, you're kind of being the human in the loop here to make sure the proper emails. The real invoices get into this folder called vetted invoices, and then Colligo will move it over into SharePoint. All right, so let me just pop over to SharePoint here. All right, into my invoices library. All right, and you can see I have two main views here, email and invoices. So that email came in. You notice that all the metadata is here, so you're able to kind of go look at it very easily and tell who it's from, when you received it, are there attachments. So we're trying to kind of mimic the Outlook kind of view that you have in SharePoint. And then I've also got my invoices here. So Colligo not only copied it over and added all that metadata, but it also extracted the attachment and put the attachment in here. And you're probably looking at these columns here and going, well, how did all this show up? Where did I get the vendor? Where did I get the invoice date, amount due, and so on? All right, this is all the magic of a feature called SharePoint. What's it called again? Autofill. That's it. Very important word. So the SharePoint autofill is where you can, it's using AI, and you're able to kind of, I'll just open up one of them here. I'll just go to, let's take invoice number here, and I'll go down to settings, edit. All right, and there's the autofill here. So this is, I'm using pay-as-you-go in my tenant here. So this is, it's, if you don't use it, it doesn't cost anything. If you use it a lot, it's going to cost, but it's not going to be very much money. And I'm going to edit prompt here. And the great thing about this is I didn't even have to write this prompt. I just told SharePoint, I'd like to extract this column here, this invoice number, and it prompted me, it provided a really useful prompt. And then I was able to come down here and test it out. So I clicked here, hit test, and then automatically found the invoice number in the Word file. So it's pretty cool. It works really well. All right, and then there's also some new things in SharePoint, like there's these buttons here. These are called, I forget what they're called now, but you basically click on the button. Quick steps is what they're called, and you can then kind of easily mark things as done. Now, one of the cool things about getting things into SharePoint is then you can take advantage of the Copilot, and I've got a pretty cool Copilot here. So I'm going to bring up. Looks like my prompt has gone away. I just reset it here. Let me just go back to that.
It knows you're doing a demo.
Yes, it's called demo mode. There we go. All right, I'm just going to select Copilot here. I'm not in the right library, but that's okay. I'm going to add my prompt in here, so I'm just going to copy that over. So we have a lot of customers that are using this to kind of get insights and information about all the information that they're filing into SharePoint. So I'm going to copy over my prompt here, and I'll paste it and just get it going right away. All right, you notice that this prompt here is actually pulling from some of the metadata. For example, Jack in the Box is the vendor, total amount was also a metadata column, and also not paid. And now I'm running it, and now it's coming back with the answer. And so that's a pretty, a pretty important question. You might say, okay, I'm doing a bit of analysis here about one of our vendors here, and it was able to find the invoice. I marked one of them as paid, so it skipped over it. And then it basically came in and actually will add it together and give me a total. And it's, of course, thinking a lot more now than it did when I did the test. Here we go. All right, there's the unpaid total, $1,800, and one invoice. All right. So that's pretty cool. I think you'll find, all sorts of options with combining the different solutions together. Okay, let me look at my time here. Okay, I've got 5 minutes to show you some other cool stuff. All right, a little bit more about Colligo. So that was using our Colligo auto file. But of course, you might have other solutions where you'd like to file individual emails for different use cases. For example, you're doing a project, maybe you'd like to file things quickly to your Teams folder. And so Colligo has the ability not only to work with your Outlook folders over here, but you can also file as you go. So you select an email. All right, well, let's select this one here. Open up Colligo. I have the locations I'm working on regularly here. So I can then file this email very quickly just by selecting the upload button. And just like with the auto file, Colligo is going to go in and pull out of your email all the metadata that is important, which helps you find the information over on the other end. And so you can see the email metadata is filled in, but of course you might have a use case where you maybe want to add in other metadata, like maybe you want to add some comments. All right, so it depends on the use case. I'll just add a little category here. So let's say that was a contract. I can just say that is an agreement. Of course, that adds context, which would make Copilot work really well with it at the other end. All right, and we also have a lot of good automation here. For example, if I'm emailing, having a conversation going, and I'm getting all sorts of replies to the email, I don't have to spend time figuring out where it should go. I can just select my email here, open up Colligo, and in this case here, Colligo is recognizing, there we go, recognizes that this email is part of a threaded conversation, and I filed something from that conversation earlier. And so instead of me trying to remember where should it go, we'll just rely on Colligo to remember where I filed the previous emails. So it's going to tell me here where the previous ones went. If I want to check that, I can, hover over that, but I can just click on yes, and that is now filed away. And I don't even have to wait and watch it. I can just, close up Colligo here and let it process it all in the cloud. All right, I think I accomplished my goal here. And back to you, Tim and Michael.
Yeah, and I'll just point out so that all that pulling out the metadata automatically in SharePoint, that really feeds into records management, right? So whether it's like a PO number, whether it's a client name, whether it's a status of something, we will often drive that to classify the content, and that's a richness to the records management or sensitive labels and so on and so forth. So that beautiful story of like, I've got important records in my email. I set up an area that will automatically send it to the correct location in SharePoint. And then now we can extract all that rich metadata, make it search sortable and findable. And then we can automatically apply the records management bit with a good degree of granularity to that solution. And then it makes AI better and makes it easier to do integrations, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. So we're having a competition to see which company will get the most emails. So whoever had the best jokes in this webinar, make sure you email them. But I guess we can move on to questions.
Can you use the rules function in Outlook to launch a move?
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So from our perspective, we actually see this pair quite well with the auto file, right? You direct emails with a certain pattern in them, whether it's subject line, sender, etc., into a folder, sweep those into an Outlook folder, and then you activate and make that folder synced, or sometimes what we call a hot folder, using Colligo between Outlook and SharePoint, right? So then it can be an end-to-end automatic process while still stripping out attachments or that metadata and applying retention and all those things. So so that's a great question. We see that use case quite a bit, and we think it can be quite powerful. So.
Thanks, Tim. Mike, anything to add?
No, I doubled down on that. It's you can, lots of cool stuff you can do, flags and auto moving and auto organization, and they could take it over from there. So
Okay, thanks. We have another question here. Any Canadian local government use Colligo currently?
Yes, plenty. Yes, and I don't know, I'm at liberty to say all their names on the webinar here today, but we can certainly have a follow-up chat, and many of those we work on with Gravity Union as well. So yeah, between the two of us, lots of coverage there in both Canadian and US state and local, province and local government bodies. So yeah.
And overseas.
We got one more here. Does email filing need to be done one email at a time? Is there an option to do batches?
Another great question. So yeah, so what Roland showed you in the latter point of that demo is the filing one at a time, right? Open Colligo or keep it pinned open, destination, and hit upload, right? But if you're looking at larger quantities, we can actually turn your existing Outlook folders, or you can create new Outlook folders and have that whole batch migrate up to SharePoint. And so we talked a lot about setting up that auto file. Well, that auto file doesn't have to be recurring. It can be a one-time thing and can move a whole batch of emails over to SharePoint as just a one-time cleanup job. And we see that quite frequently as well as a use case. And so as you set up that auto file job, as Roland was showing you in the demo, you would just choose the one-time option as opposed to the recurring option. And you could then bring hundreds, thousands, any number of emails, we haven't hit the limits yet, over to SharePoint there. So
yeah, and let me just add, like there's also a middle option, so you can do either the folder-based automatic filing, select an individual email, but you can also select multiple emails. So if you have like 5 or 6 emails that are all related together, you can file them all at the same time. So you don't have to do it one at a time.
So the next question about renaming the email. So I forget, Tim, does your product use the subject as the name of the document of the email in SharePoint?
yes. Yeah, Roland, why don't you take this one, just because there's the name and the title.
Yeah, so you're probably used to when you drag and drop an email into SharePoint, the subject becomes the file name. And of course, that doesn't work out too good when you're filing multiple emails that are part of a conversation. So what we do is we file the file name. We consider it to be more of a utility. Like you don't really look at the file name for an email. It's subject, sender, date, time. And that way, every email is uniquely named. If you have, the first email you send out is going to have a unique name. You get a reply back, different date, different time, different sender, and back and forth, and so on. So all the different versions of the back and forth are going to have their own unique name. Yeah. The other cool thing about that is if multiple people are filing the same emails, we will block, SharePoint will technically block the duplicates. So you'll end up with one source of truth and one of each email in SharePoint, and that way you don't waste a lot of space.
No.
And
there's a conceptual discussion here in terms of like, let's just say that you could edit the subject. Should you? Because really the subject is probably a really important bit of that email metadata.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's almost part of the record. So if you want to you do a huge investigation, you're looking into what's in Outlook and what's in SharePoint, so on and so forth. But yeah, ultimately the name is just an out of the box SharePoint field that you can change to that. But I certainly wouldn't try to mess with the other fields. They should be immutable. I think they are immutable.
Yeah, Michael, we fill in the title column with the subject, by the way. So
perfect.
So that's a built-in field in SharePoint. So yeah, we take care of that.
Excellent. Is the email stored in SharePoint as a PDF, Roland?
No, for legal reasons, we store the original email. So it's we can save it as an MSG or an email, and that way that all the headers and all the components of that email are intact. So it's particularly important if you have lawsuits happening where you can prove, this is a legitimate email, that here's the distribution, here's the date and time that are in the headers. So yeah, we store the full email, and then you can open that up again in Outlook if you want.
Yeah. So, and depending on how you have SharePoint in your local systems configured, yeah, when you double click on the email in SharePoint, it opens up in Outlook, and you can action it, forward it, whatever. Exactly. So yeah, but if there was a PDF attached to your email, it would certainly store that as a PDF. And then as well, if you have attachments that are embedded, you can pull them out separately and store them as an attachment. Or if they're still part of the email, they'll be embedded there in the email when you'll see them when you open the email. Good questions.
So we have one last one, just in time as we're ending. We have encountered issues being unable to open older messages. Did you say we can convert the email and attachments to PDF?
Yeah, so we save them by default as EML files, which has the widest compatibility. If you would like to save them as MSG, that's actually a conversion. So we just found that EMLs are a lot less problematic. We haven't had any kind of issues with things that are not being able to get them open. But yeah, MSG has gone through some variations through time. So even though that's supposedly this Microsoft native format, it's is a little problematic.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Mike. I think we're at time, so thank you everybody for joining the webinar, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.